How exactly is the nature of community changing in this digital age? And here I'm talking about both online communities and in-person communities. I'm talking about identity-based communities and lifestyle-based communities. And I think this is an important topic because in a lot of ways community relates to trust. And I would actually like to explore that relationship between community and trust and how that is evolving. Because in a lot of ways, trust is something that is becoming commodified. We know that social media companies essentially sell trust when they sell your eyeballs to advertisers, where content that is related to your community and to people that you trust, which is oftentimes community-based. If you trust them, then the price of 1 minute of their time with an advertisement next to their content is higher. So I think this is an interesting economic question, in addition to just being an important question overall. And where I'd like to go with this, first I'd like to explore the different types of communities out there, and then what constitutes a community, like what do all of these different types of communities have in common? And then I'd like to explore the relationship between community and trust. And then I would like to think about what is a bad version or a worrisome version of community moving forward, and what is a hopeful version? Like, what is a vision of the future with community that includes the way online spaces are evolving that could be really exciting and hopeful. So first off, let's just go through the different types of community. And of course, online versus offline is obviously one source of change, where online communities are growing in their importance and offline communities perhaps are shrinking in their importance, with perhaps a few exceptions like workplace communities. But just a few notes about online versus offline communities. One thing I've noticed about online communities is that they're kind of fickle and they don't have that sticking power, where sometimes they'll just take off and almost go viral as a community, and they'll have their heyday, and then when there starts to be conflict or things start to be boring, they can disappear just as quickly as they appeared. And I think there is low levels of commitment in online communities, and that stickiness of commitment, I think, is a very powerful thing in a community if you're committed enough to the people there to persist through conflict or persist through misunderstandings or hard times. There's something powerful about that. And online communities don't have that. Then another dichotomy is strong ties versus weak ties communities. And of course, strong ties communities include your family, your extended family, people with long-term commitments to you. I think this could include professional communities if you see people year after year, like we do at academic conferences. Strong ties have a little bit more of that sticking power, whereas weak ties, you can definitely have weak ties in a face-to-face community, like you perhaps do with the people you see at the grocery store, but you're not really committed to looking out for their interests or being there for them in a time of hardship. So strong ties versus weak ties is another dichotomy. And if I'm thinking about how do these change and move over time, I would honestly say the digital age has expanded weak ties. And of course, weak ties are not a bad thing. Like most, I think, jobs are gotten through weak ties that are sort of 2 or 3 steps removed from your strong ties. And the online space has made it easier to network 2 and 3 and 4 steps out from your strong ties. So I would say weak ties are absolutely increasing because of the online space in a good way. But perhaps strong ties are decreasing because of how mobile our society is, how low commitment so many of the spaces are, especially spaces where we're not being paid to show up to. Then there are lifestyle-based communities, which is communities that you see people on a regular basis. It's not that you intentionally came together, but the regularity of your contact creates this natural community. And I think the version of this that's definitely increasing is the workplace community, where for a lot of people, the workplace is their main social outlet. It's the main group of people that they spend the most time with. And that's definitely a lifestyle-based community. Church communities, of course, can be lifestyle-based because you build in these habits of going to church on a regular basis. Grocery store communities, or being a regular at a restaurant where you go back to that restaurant over and over, and you're at least kind of used to the people who work there and the people who go there often. Maybe you don't have strong ties with them, but you see them frequently enough to where you know their personalities a little bit, and there's a little bit of bonding that goes on. And I think a similar thing happens with like gyms, where you might go to the gym and know the employees there, you might know the other people working there. So these are all versions of lifestyle-based communities. And it's hard to say whether these have increased or decreased due to new technology. But in a lot of ways, I think, obviously, with the pandemic, being a regular at a restaurant diminished. And with people ordering stuff online, perhaps the community of people you see at the grocery store might have diminished. So there has been a little bit of a weakening of these sort of lifestyle-based communities. Now, I do think the workplace community has expanded, and it's one that I'm somewhat worried about because it's a lot of power to have over someone if the employer has the power to sort of take away your main social ties for your main community. And then there's organizational-based communities. And this overlaps with lifestyle communities, but not 100%. So obviously, workplaces are organizations. But if you work for a really big corporation, there might be people you don't see on a regular basis who are still in that corporation's community, who still have some sort of ties that you could potentially access. Professional communities, like with academics, I'm an economist, so the community of economists nationwide and worldwide is a community that I belong to. And there are organizations that uphold economists, such as the AEA. Professional communities, I think, are a version of organizational-based communities. Faith-based communities oftentimes have an organizational structure with hierarchy and all of that. And my sense is that organizational-based communities are becoming stronger as communities because they have the digital tools to connect with each other, even if they don't live in the same geographical region. That's my sense. Then there are identity-based communities, which could include religious identity or cultural identity, ethnic identity, political identity. And in a lot of ways, this could even include identity as a fan of a certain TV show or a certain musician or a certain content creator online. And identity-based communities have obviously grown because these are sort of the lifeblood of the internet, is these communities that come together around a certain cause or affinity that they all feel for each other. Now, at this point, we need to ask the question, what exactly is a community? Like, what constitutes a community? What do all of these different forms of community have in common? And there's an article I will link to below that identifies 4 common traits of community. And that is membership, influence, reinforcement, and shared emotional connection. And membership, of course, can be implicit or explicit, but you could roughly define who is a member of this community and who is not, based on some set of criteria, however vague. Influence means the people in these communities act and behave and think in ways that are at least partially shaped by those communities that they belong to, that they care about. Reinforcement sort of emphasizes the fact that these communities have patterns to them, and those patterns come together to create that influence. And then shared emotional connection is important because otherwise people in these communities wouldn't really care about their membership. They wouldn't be paying enough attention to the nature of the community, the values of the community, for it to actually influence them. And then other sources will identify socialization as a function that communities fulfill, where they do shape people's behavior. And I think that kind of fits in the category of the 4 things from that article. Okay, so how does community relate to trust? And I kind of think one way of defining community is that it gives you some kind of trust map for other people in the community. And there are different versions of this. So if I'm thinking about face-to-face communities, like workplace communities or friend group communities, there's this trust map that's very personalized to the people you interact with regularly. And that is, you know when to trust each person individually based on their personality. Because trust, of course, is not just high or low. Like, you trust people in specific areas. And in a community, you might actually trust some people to be really good at handling themselves in emergency situations when the stakes are high. Whereas other people in that community, you might kind of know that they're going to fall apart if crisis happens and they're not reliable in that circumstance. That's personality-based. In communities, you know who to trust for perhaps to show up on time, to pay their bills on time, and who might let some of those details slip. You know who to trust, being respectful to your parents, or who to trust, who would be good with children. You learn the individual nuance of each person's areas of trust and distrust. And I think that's a really powerful thing about communities, is that the communities learn how to work together in a way that is way more nuanced to the individuals in a community. Now, this is, of course, a strong bonds type of community. But I think trust maps, they also relate to some of these weak ties communities, especially if the community has some values where you know everybody in that community is at least trying to uphold those values. Whether or not they're able to do that perfectly, you kind of know, okay, they're going to be on my side in this particular circumstance because they identify with the values of the community and with whatever makes that community whole. And I mean, this could be as weak as, let's say, Justin Bieber fans. Okay, what's the trust map there? It's just a trust map that they're not going to look down on you for being a fan of Justin Bieber. They value that. You're not trusting them with much, but you're trusting them to have this certain affinity if you show up. And I think that kind of trust does have value. Okay, so finally, as community is changing, what is a worrisome direction of that change? And what could be a really hopeful vision of community in the future that doesn't require completely disconnecting from online, but rather uses the tools online to strengthen the powerful parts of community? So let's start with the worrisome stuff. And this includes pseudo-community. It includes online spaces where it kind of feels like you know people and it kind of feels like a deep ties community, but that knowledge of people isn't real. Like, nobody really knows you as a person. They might know your comment style. They might know some really crude things about you, but they don't know you as deeply. And they also only know the parts of yourself that you show in that community online. And same with them. Like, you know what they show intentionally online in their comments or whatnot, but you don't know the deeper part of who they are. And I think that kind of community, especially if it displaces community where you are known and seen and valued for who you are, it can just be kind of like junk food community. And I think the lack of commitment in those spaces online actually makes this kind of community way more common, because you kind of need a stick-to-itness to get that long-lasting community where people are truly known and seen. And then the second category of my worry about communities is this commodification factor. It's the fact that trust, it is how products sell stuff. So social media companies are essentially trying to build trust that will allow you to be willing to buy stuff from people in that community or influencers in that community. And the fact that it is commodified makes it manipulative. And communities, like healthy communities, are not manipulative. healthy communities serve the purpose of the members of that community, not the economic interests of those who are coming in trying to get a piece of what's going on. And then my last worry about community online is the lack of peer-to-peer relationships in that community. So, for example, a lot of communities sort of rally around an influencer or a cause or an identity online, but there are leaders who sort of lead that community without members of the community even knowing anybody else in the community very personally. And I think that gives too much power to the leaders of online communities. So those are my 3 basic worries about the direction that community is evolving. But I do think there's a lot of hope for communities to become revitalized, to become healthier, and even to sort of transcend communities of the past. And one of my areas of hope has to do with the fact that because communities are trust-based, the information environment online has the potential to improve knowledge and information about where we should trust and where we should distrust. And I'm not saying we're there yet. I actually don't think we're there yet. And I think some of these financial manipulative powers are distorting that space right now. But the tool set for coming up with a stronger foundation of what to trust and what not to trust, that tool set exists. And I mean, that might include even something like, who do you trust in your community to give you good diet advice? Or who do you trust in your community to recommend a plumber? I mean, all of these things that are natural parts of the community. In the past, those might have been based on sort of intuition. They might have fallen victim to the halo effect, where somebody who's really charismatic, you might have trusted them for a lot of these things, even if they're not actually the best source of information. And I think digital tools can help you figure out who in your community is best to trust for different types of information. Now, I think the big piece that's missing right now with online communities, I think this is actually going to be behind the next step of evolution of, I'll call it social media. It may be so different from social media that it doesn't even deserve to be called that. But I think this is this peer-to-peer relationship that I think people are hungry for, people are craving, but I don't think digital spaces have done a good job yet at making that kind of thing happen. And I think the structure that needs to happen for more peer-to-peer relationships to form, that needs to structure incentives differently, and it needs to make things a little bit more predictable. It needs to create stronger expectations and communication of expectations. There are a lot of sort of institutional parts of that make it a difficult thing to make happen. But I do think the online space is going to figure it out, and that will be powerful in forming new connections with people that you relate to on a level that could potentially be deeper than the people you see on a regular basis at your local restaurant. And especially if there's a way of sort of mixing relationships that you form online with offline communities. So I think it'll happen, hasn't happened yet, but it's exciting.